12:01 a.m. The stretcher slammed through the doors of St. Helena, wheels skidding, sheets streaked with red. On it lay Dorian Sullivan, the man every cop wanted in cuffs and every rival wanted in the ground. His dark navy jacket hung open, sliced straight down the middle. Blood soaked through the fabric and spread across his chest and abdomen. Gray hair clung damply to his forehead. Ink wrapped his ribs and shoulders, tattoos cut through by torn skin and dried patches of red. Multiple gunshot wounds, front only, the paramedics shouted as they pushed. Pressure dropping, shallow breaths, we are losing him. The automatic doors to Trauma Room 5 flew open. Bright surgical lights flooded the space, throwing harsh white over stainless tables, carts, and tangled loops of tubing. The air smelled like antiseptic and metal and something heavier that no cleaner could hide. On 3, 1, 2, 3. They lifted Dorian to the bed. Monitors flicked on. Lines were clipped to his chest. A cuff squeezed his arm. Numbers flashed a series of warnings that no one wanted to say out loud. Heart rate is tanking. Where is my second IV? Get me O negative! Voices crashed into each other. A young man with dark skin and tight curls fumbled with a suction tube, trying to clear blood from one side of Dorian's torso. A woman with light brown hair snapped open a packet of gauze and pressed it down, hands shaking. Another nurse checked the monitor and recited numbers in a flat voice, as if detachment could slow the decline. His pressure is 70/40. That cannot be right. Check the line. The lead surgeon stepped in, snapping on gloves with sharp, quick movements. His eyes raked over the wounds, one in the upper chest, two near the ribs, one low in the abdomen, one just beneath the collarbone. Clamp that lower bleed. I want a central line now. You, move. You, get out of my way. Hands swarmed Dorian's body, gauze pressed down, scissors cut away the rest of the navy jacket. Fresh sheets soaked through almost as fast as they were laid. He is going into shock. He will not make it through this rate of loss. Someone increase the fluids. Not too fast. You will blow his pressure. The beeping from the ECG grew uneven, high and frantic, then weaker. At the very back of the room, half hidden behind the cluster of bodies and equipment, Tess Donovan watched. Her light blue scrubs were streaked from earlier cases. Blood stained the fingers of her white gloves from a patient she had handed off just 20 minutes ago. Her blonde hair was tied back tight, not a strand on her face. Her blue eyes followed every movement around the bed. 6 months on the job. That was all anyone knew about her. The new nurse, good with vitals, quiet in handovers, fast on her feet when the call lights stacked. The one who took extra shifts no one else wanted. The one who stayed after hours to check on patients who were already charted as stable. Useful, but not trusted with anything that felt like life or death. Get that rookie off the wall and out of the way, someone muttered once under their breath, loud enough for her to hear. Tess stayed where she was. She knew better than to argue. She watched Dorian's chest instead. The rise and fall had gone from strained to ragged. His breaths came shallow, then paused too long, then forced themselves out in short bursts. His lips lost more color with every passing second. Pressure is 60/30. We are losing him. He has coded twice in transit. He cannot take much more. Her gaze moved to the blood itself. It was not just the amount that bothered her. It was the pattern. The spread along the right side, heavier near one wound that looked smaller than the others, but pulsed with a slow, deep flow that did not match the surface damage. Something inside her twisted. It is not random. Her mind tried to stay quiet. Her body did not listen. Where is my second unit? The surgeon barked. Why is this not hanging yet? We cannot get the line. His veins are collapsing. Try again. We are out of time. The room spun closer to panic. Tess heard the words, but they sounded far away. Her focus locked on the faint movement at Dorian's throat. A small, rapid flutter where the pulse should have been stronger. Too fast, too weak, too shallow. Her chest tightened with a feeling she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Not here. Not in this place, where she was supposed to be ordinary. She stepped forward. No one noticed at first. Everyone else was busy with clamps and lines and orders. Tess moved around the foot of the bed and up along the side until she stood near his head. Now someone saw her. "What are you doing?" the surgeon snapped. "You should not be here. Step back." She did not. Tess placed 2 fingers on the side of Dorian's neck, just above the collar of what remained of his jacket. Not at the usual spot they taught in school. A little higher, a touch deeper. Right where muscle, artery, and nerve met in a way she knew by memory, not by textbook. His skin felt cooler than it should, but the faint throb under her fingers matched what she had seen on the monitor. Too fast, too weak, ready to crash. Her other hand eased under his jaw, shifting the angle of his airway by a fraction. Not enough to seem obvious, enough to free something that had been partially blocked. "Tess," one of the nurses hissed, eyes wide. "You cannot touch him. He is not a normal patient." "He is a patient," Tess said, voice low. Her heart pounded, her breathing slowed. Count, 1, 2, 3. She altered the pressure with her fingers, following a pattern her muscles knew, even while her mind fought to keep the memories closed. A hot tent, men shouting, sand in the air. A different man on a different table, one heartbeat from the end. Not here, not now. Focus. The beeping on the monitor stuttered. Someone glanced up. "What was that?" "Check the leads." The rhythm changed. The line on the screen settled into a more regular shape. The numbers began to shift. Heart rate is climbing back. Pressure is 68/38, 70/40. That is not possible. We did nothing new. Who touched him? The surgeon turned, eyes locking on Tess. Her fingers were still at Dorian's neck. Her shoulders were stiff, her jaw tight, but her hands were steady. "What did you do?" he demanded. Tess released the pressure. Her hand slipped away from his jaw. She stepped back from the bed. The monitor kept its new rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The numbers rose another line. Blood pressure survived the climb instead of sliding back into freefall. Oxygen saturation ticked up by 2 points, then 3. A breath that had been caught in the room finally left someone's chest. "He is stabilizing." "Is that real?" "It looks real." No one rushed to praise her. The surgeon's face flushed, not with relief, but with something closer to humiliation. "You had no standing to touch this man," he said, voice clipped. "You overstepped in a critical moment. If that had gone wrong, we would have lost him, and it would have been on you." Tess opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew that any answer she gave would only make it worse. "He is alive," she said quietly. "For now," he bit out. "Because of all of us, not because of whatever stunt you just pulled. Get out of my trauma room. You are done here." A senior nurse grabbed Tess by the sleeve, pulling her toward the door. Her whisper came through clenched teeth. "You should not have done that. You do not understand who he is. You do not understand who is watching this." Tess let herself be moved. She looked back only once, just long enough to see Dorian's chest rising in a more regular rhythm, his skin still pale but no longer draining by the second. Her fingertips still tingled from the pulse under them. "This is not the first time you have dragged a dying man back." She shoved the thought away. 10 minutes later, Tess stood in the director's office. Her badge lay on the desk between them. The director's expression was hard, in a way that had nothing to do with hospital policy and everything to do with fear and pressure from outside the building. "You violated protocol on a high-risk patient," he said. "You touched a person under federal watch without authorization. That is not a mistake we can ignore." "I saved his life," Tess replied, still calm. She was more tired than angry. His eyes did not soften. "You made this hospital vulnerable. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Security will escort you out." "There is no appeal?" she asked. "No," he said. She nodded once. Her throat felt tight, but she held his gaze until he looked away. Tess turned, opened the door, and walked into the hallway. No one followed. No one spoke. News traveled fast in a place like this, and silence could carry more judgment than words. The automatic doors at the entrance parted in front of her. Cold air rushed in, sharp against the warm humidity inside. The parking lot stretched out, mostly empty, lit by pale streetlights that put silver edges on parked cars and oil-dark patches of asphalt. Her scrubs had stiffened where Dorian's blood had dried, the fabric pulling uncomfortably at her knees when she walked. She took one step, then another. On the third, the ground shivered under her shoes. Engines. Not one. Several. The sound rolled closer, thick and heavy, like a storm of metal. Tess turned toward the entrance drive. 10 black SUVs glided into view in a straight line, headlights cutting through the night. They rolled up to the emergency entrance and stopped with the kind of precision she had only seen in training exercises. Doors opened almost at the same moment. Men and women stepped out, all in dark suits, earpieces in their ears, movements sharp and controlled. None of them looked confused. None of them hesitated. Inside the glass doors of St. Helena, 2 nurses pressed closer to the entrance, eyes wide. A doctor appeared behind them, phone in hand, staring. "Did the mafia boss die?" someone whispered from inside. Tess knew without a doubt they were not here to collect a body. They were here for something else. The older man in front, tall with short gray hair and a face set in careful lines, looked straight at her. He walked in a direct line, not even glancing at the hospital doors. "Tess Donovan," he said when he reached her. Her name in his mouth sounded more like a statement than a question. She did not answer. Her heart beat hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. "We have been trying to locate you for a long time," he said calmly. "Tonight, you made that easier." "I am a nurse," Tess said. "You have the wrong person." His eyes did not change. "You did not learn what you did in that room at a nursing program," he replied. "You know that, and so do we." Behind him, the SUVs idled. The hospital staff at the door could not hear the words, but they could see where his attention went, and that was enough to fuel their fear. "Not here," he added after a moment. "Too many people watching. Come with us. We need to talk about where you learned to bring a man like Dorian Sullivan back from the edge with your hands and no guidance." Every part of Tess wanted to turn and walk away, to tell him no, to disappear into the dark edges of the parking lot and never come back. But she had tried that once already. She had hidden in a quiet job with night shifts and routine tasks. She had changed her hair, buried her history, and kept her head down. Tonight, a man everyone expected to die lived because she forgot to pretend. Tess glanced back at the glass doors. The director stood behind them now, face pale. Nurses whispered behind their hands. One of the younger techs lifted a phone like he wanted to record, then slowly lowered it again, unsure if he was allowed. There was nothing left here for her. No badge, no job, no safety. She turned back to the man. "Fine," she said softly. He stepped aside and gestured toward the nearest SUV. Tess walked with him, every step feeling steady on the outside and unsteady on the inside. Her palms felt damp inside her gloves. Her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with running. The back door opened. Tess climbed in. The air inside was cool and still. The faint smell of leather and disinfectant hung in the cabin. The door shut behind her with a solid thud, cutting off the sight of the hospital and the faces at the window. 2 agents sat on either side of her. The older man took the seat facing her, a tablet already lit in his hand. He tapped the screen once, then turned it toward her. The image that stared back was sharp and unavoidable. Her own face, not in light blue scrubs, in dark tactical gear, vest strapped tight, helmet pushed back, night vision raised above her eyes, a radio at her shoulder, a weapon she did not want to remember at her side. Dirt streaked across her cheeks, and a small, tired smile she barely recognized. Tess felt her fingers curl against her knees. "We never believed you disappeared for good," the man said quietly. "We did not expect you to be hiding as a nurse in a city hospital." She looked away from the screen, but the picture stayed in her mind, stronger than the lights inside the SUV. "I did not resurface," Tess said. Her voice came out low and steady. "I did my best to disappear." He watched her for a long moment. "Tonight you did not," he replied. "Tonight you saved Dorian Sullivan, and in the way you did it, you told everyone who knows what to look for exactly who you are." Outside, the convoy started to move, rolling them away from St. Helena and the life she had tried to build. Inside, Tess sat with the image of herself in combat gear and understood that this night was not just about a mafia boss on a stretcher. It was about everything she thought she had left behind. And for the first time in years, the past she had locked away was about to speak. The SUV rolled through the dark streets, its headlights cutting a narrow path in the night. Tess sat in the back, her body stiff, eyes fixed on the road ahead. She didn't want to look at the man across from her. She didn't want to acknowledge the questions he had just dropped on her, questions she had long buried. The cold leather of the seat beneath her was the only thing that kept her grounded. Every nerve in her body was alert, alive with a mix of fear and something darker, more familiar. Her mind refused to stop replaying the events in the ER the moment her hands had hovered over Dorian's body. The way she had felt the old instincts surge to the surface. It had been years since she had been thrust into the chaos of life and death decisions. But tonight, everything she had tried to forget came rushing back. The agent across from her remained silent, watching her closely. His expression was unreadable, but Tess could feel the weight of his scrutiny pressing down on her. Every inch of her was pulled taut, as though she were a bowstring ready to snap. Finally, the agent spoke. "You did it again," he said, his voice low but firm. "You didn't just save him, Tess. You saved him in a way that most people would never have been able to. You knew exactly what to do. The way you moved. The pressure you applied. It wasn't something you learned at St. Helena." Tess swallowed, forcing the lump in her throat down. She didn't answer. There was no explanation. How could she explain something she wasn't supposed to remember? Something she had buried deep in her past? The agent didn't push her. Instead, he pulled up something on his tablet, swiping through a series of files. The screen flickered for a moment before he turned it toward her. Tess hesitated, but then glanced at the device. A photo of her. But not the Tess Donovan the hospital knew. Not the nurse with light blue scrubs, bright eyes, and a soft smile. This was a woman in combat gear. A combat medic. She was standing in the middle of a dusty, barren landscape, the sun setting behind her. Her face was covered in dirt, her hair tied back beneath a helmet. Her eyes sharp and focused. She was holding a rifle, but her expression wasn't the one of a soldier on the battlefield. It was the calm determination of someone who had seen too much and was ready to face more. It wasn't a photo she recognized, but she knew it was her. There was no mistaking the face. The agent's voice cut through her thoughts. "We tracked you down, Tess," he continued. "We didn't expect you to resurface, but we never believed you died. Not really." She closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. How could she have thought she could outrun it? It wasn't just Dorian's life that was at risk. It was hers too. "You were part of a classified unit," the agent continued. "A team of combat medics who were wiped out in an operation. Everyone else was killed. Except for you." The words landed with the force of a punch to the gut. Tess clenched her fists, feeling the blood in her veins run cold. She couldn't look at the screen anymore. She couldn't face the truth, not after everything she had done to hide from it. They never reported you as alive, the agent added, his tone unyielding. But we know better. You escaped, Tess. You left, and you buried everything. You buried yourself. Tess finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I had no choice. The agent met her gaze, his eyes narrowing. You always had a choice. You made a new life for yourself. You erased your past, erased the memories of your squad. But tonight, it all came back. You couldn't let him die, could you? You couldn't stop yourself from stepping in, from doing what you've always done. Tess felt her pulse quicken as the weight of his words sank in. He wasn't wrong. She hadn't hesitated. When she saw Dorian's lifeless form on that stretcher, something inside her had snapped back into place. Old training, old instincts. They had resurfaced in that moment, and for the first time in years, she had felt like she was doing what she was meant to do. But the truth was, she had never wanted to be that person again. The medic, the soldier, the one who had been responsible for saving lives in the most brutal of conditions. The one who had buried her comrades when they fell. The silence stretched between them. Tess didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if there was anything left to say. The past was a dark place, and every step she took now would only bring it closer to the surface. We need you, Tess, the agent said after a moment, his voice steady. Dorian Sullivan is not just some mafia boss. He's connected to something much bigger than you or me. This is bigger than you could ever imagine, and we need you to help us bring it down. Tess stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know if she was ready to go back into the world she had left behind. But one thing was certain, her world had already changed. Whether she liked it or not, she was already in too deep. You saved Dorian's life, the agent continued. Now we need to know how deep this goes. Who is pulling the strings, and what did Dorian know? Tess leaned back against the seat, her mind racing. The agent's words didn't sit right with her. Something about this didn't add up. Dorian was just a mafia boss, right? But there was something more to this, something hidden beneath the surface, and the fact that he had been targeted in the first place spoke volumes. Her heart was still pounding from the events at the hospital. She wasn't sure if she could handle what was coming next. But one thing was certain. She could never go back to being the nurse who had once been invisible. The world had already changed around her, and now she had to find out what it had become. The SUV slowed as it approached a secluded building on the outskirts of town. Tess's mind buzzed, but she stayed silent, watching the agents around her, trying to gauge whether they could be trusted. She had saved Dorian's life, but now she had to decide if she was going to save her own. And if so, what price would she have to pay to do it? The SUV stopped, the doors opening silently. We're here, the agent said. Tess stepped out of the vehicle, her body tense, her nerves on edge. As the door shut behind her, she felt the weight of her old life pressing down on her once again. And this time, there would be no turning back. Tess stepped out of the SUV and the air hit her like a physical blow, smelling of ozone and industrial cleaner. The fluorescent lights in the long concrete hallway above them gave off a low electric thrum, flickering over damp patches on the walls. It felt less like a building and more like a tomb. She followed the agents, her own footsteps echoing unnervingly, her mind a frantic scramble of the conversation from the car. Saving a life was muscle memory, but being abducted by men in severe dark suits who spoke of global conspiracies felt like a plunge into an icy abyss. The corridor opened into a vast cavernous space that was anything but abandoned. It wasn't a room so much as a nerve center, a web of glowing screens and humming server racks. Cables snaked across the floor like thick, black vines. Agents moved with a quiet, unnerving economy of motion, their faces illuminated by the shifting data on their monitors. Their low, murmured voices were a constant undercurrent to the frantic clatter of keyboards. Every eye seemed to find her, linger for a moment, and dismiss her again, their expressions unreadable. A chair scraped against the concrete. "Sit," one of the agents instructed. The sound was sharp and loud in the tense quiet. Tess hesitated, her muscles screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. She lowered herself into the metal chair, its frame cold and unyielding against her back. The lead agent approached the table. He was a tall, lean man with a stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat. He didn't move a single unnecessary muscle. "We don't have time for pleasantries, Dr. Donovan," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. The use of her formal title was a deliberate, chilling choice. "You need to grasp the reality of your situation. Dorian Sullivan is not who you think he is." Tess's jaw tightened. "I don't think he's anything. He was a patient bleeding out on my table, that's all." "You think you saved a gangster," the agent countered, his gaze unwavering. He sat across from her, his posture ramrod straight. "You saved a ghost, a linchpin." He slid a thin file across the table. It stopped perfectly before her. "Dorian Sullivan is the architect of an enterprise that makes organized crime look like a child's game. He's the money, the muscle, and the memory for a network that has its fingers wrapped around the throat of 3 different governments." Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. The contents were sickening. Not just lists of names and numbers, but photographs. Crates overflowing with assault rifles on a dusty airstrip. Satellite photos of clandestine meetings on private yachts between uniformed generals and men in tailored suits. Financial records that spiraled into the billions, laundered through shell corporations with phantom addresses. This wasn't a criminal empire. This was a shadow government. The air in her lungs felt thin and useless. The agent watched her, his eyes like chips of flint. "We've been hunting the fragments of this organization for a decade. They are ghosts, always one step ahead. But Sullivan, he knows the blueprint. He knows every name, every account, every dirty secret. And when he was attacked tonight, you didn't just save a man. You saved our only key to dismantling the entire structure." Tessa's mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The man on the gurney, his life in her hands, was at the center of this global nightmare. "So you were watching him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And so were they," the agent replied. "The people he works for decided he was a liability. The people he works against want him for what he knows. You've just painted a target on your own back by saving his." Tess felt a surge of defiant anger. "Why are you telling me this? I'm a doctor. I patch people up. That's my job." The agent's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped slightly. "Because your involvement didn't end in the operating room. You have a skill set we can't replicate. You got close to him. You saw something, felt something. You made a choice no one else would have. That makes you valuable, or it makes you a threat to be neutralized." She flinched. "Why me? What do you want from me?" "Answers," he said simply. He tapped a keyboard beside him, and one of the large screens flickered to life. It showed an aerial view of a fortress-like compound, walled and patrolled. "This is where Sullivan's inner circle is holed up. But the orders to hit him didn't come from a rival. They came from inside." He zoomed the image in, not on the compound, but on a familiar, sprawling building. Her hospital. "Someone on your staff sold him out," the agent stated, the words landing like stones. "They facilitated the attack. They knew his location, his condition, and by extension, they sold you out too." Betrayed. The word echoed in the sudden ringing silence of her mind. Her carefully constructed life, the one she had built from the ashes of her past, was a lie. Someone she worked with, someone she might have passed in the hall just that morning, had tried to orchestrate a murder. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but something else was solidifying alongside it. Anger. A deep glacial rage. "I need to know everything," Tess said, her voice now steady and cold. Who? And why? The agent nodded, a flicker of something like approval in his eyes. We will share what we can, but you must understand. The people who want Sullivan dead don't leave loose ends. They have the resources to make anyone, including a well-respected surgeon, simply vanish. Tess pushed the chair back and stood, the motion sharp and decisive. Her shock was receding, replaced by a terrifying clarity. There was no going back to her old life. It was already gone. What do you need me to do? The agent rose to meet her, his expression all business. You're going to help us get to his people before the other side does. You are the one piece on the board that no one can predict. You are going to be our ghost. Tess took a deep, steadying breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had never wanted this fight. But she was realizing, with a chilling certainty, that the fight had wanted her all along. The storm had already arrived. And Tess Donovan had just walked into the heart of it. A choice, once made, was a scar you learned to live with. Tess had always held that as a truth, but walking through the cold, concrete artery of the agent's headquarters, she felt that belief fracturing. Every choice she'd made since that night in the ER had led her deeper into this labyrinth of steel doors and recycled air, where the only sound was the distant, disembodied murmur of voices and the soft scuff of her own shoes. Her exhaustion was a physical weight, a deep ache in her bones, but her senses were on a razor's edge. She was cataloging exits, counting the agents she passed, noting the direction of the camera sweeps. It was an old, ugly instinct she thought she had purged years ago. She had saved Dorian Sullivan's life. That was the inciting incident, the terrible, irreversible choice. But the real mistake, she was beginning to realize, was believing she could ever truly leave her old life behind. The room she entered was a cavern of shadows and light, a command hub lit only by the shifting data streams on a wall of monitors. The air hummed with the quiet power of cooling fans and server racks. The half-dozen agents present were silhouetted figures around a large central table, their faces bathed in the blue and green glow of the screens. The lead agent sat at the head, a sentinel in the gloom. He didn't speak, just gestured to the empty chair. The silence was an accusation. Tess sat, the metal cold through her thin shirt. She folded her hands on the table to keep them from shaking. "We need to discuss what happened in the operating room," the agent began, his voice a low, level instrument. "The decisions you made." Tess said nothing. The memory was a blur of adrenaline and instinct, of blood-slick gloves and the frantic beat of the heart monitor. It was pure instinctual medicine. "We've reviewed the logs, the hospital's and our own," the agent continued, his eyes locked on her. "What you did in there, that wasn't a civilian procedure. You didn't just follow protocol. You improvised with a confidence that doesn't come from medical school. That was battlefield medicine." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in Tess's gut. He knew. Of course he knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. His gaze was unpitying. "You were a combat medic, special operations attachment. You spent 2 tours in places that don't officially exist. Patching up soldiers in situations where the rulebook gets thrown out the window. You saved lives by breaking the rules. That's who you are." Her breath hitched. She had buried that woman. She had scrubbed the grit from under her nails, shed the calloused exterior, and worked for years to become just a doctor, just a healer. And in one night, these men had excavated her ghost. The agent slid a file across the polished table. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "This is why your specific history matters. This is why Sullivan matters." Her fingers, now numb, opened the folder. The documents were dense and terrifying. Not just names and figures, but shipping manifests for military-grade hardware moving through civilian ports. Geotagged photos of elected officials shaking hands with known warlords on private airstrips. Financial webs that connected legitimate corporations to black site funding. It was a global conspiracy rendered in stark, undeniable print. She wasn't just a doctor who had saved a criminal, she was an ex-operative who had saved a kingpin in a secret war. "What have I gotten into?" she whispered, the question aimed at herself more than at them. The agent's eyes were dark pools. "Deeper than you can imagine. We've been chasing this network for years, and they've been liquidating assets and personnel to cover their tracks. Sullivan decided he wanted out. That's why he was hit. He holds the ledger. The entire network, every name, and every crime." Tess felt her resolve hardening over the fear. "So you want me to get it from him?" "We need you to," another agent, standing near the screens, corrected her. "The people who want him dead are not some rival gang. They are sophisticated. They have infiltrated our networks. We have a mole. They've been one step ahead of us for months." Tess stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "And you want to send me in? Why me? You have trained operatives." The lead agent's expression softened, just a fraction. "Because you are the one thing they can't account for. You are an anomaly. You're the doctor who saved him, not an agent on a mission. You can get close to him in a way we never could. He might trust you." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Trust me? I've been running from this life for 5 years. Now you want me to just dive back in because it's convenient for you?" "There is no running from this, Tess. Not anymore," the agent said, his voice dropping, becoming almost gentle, which was far more terrifying than his anger. "The moment you put your hands on his chest, you were back in the fire. They know you saved him. They will see you as a loose end. You have 2 choices. You can let this shadow war consume you and everyone you've ever known, or you can help us end it." She stared at the faces in the room, then at the glowing screens mapping out a world of secrets and death. He was right. Her old life was already a casualty. Her quiet, carefully built existence was gone. The mistake was never saving Dorian. It was thinking she could outrun her own shadow. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Tess felt the last of her panicked fear burn away, leaving behind a cold, sharp resolve. "I'll do it," she said, her voice clear and firm, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Tell me what I need to do to meet him." A low-grade thrum of dread had become Tess's new baseline. The last few hours were a disorienting smear of windowless corridors and the hum of powerful electronics, a life she hadn't chosen, but was now living breath by breath. It all traced back to a single, irrevocable decision: to save a man who was not a man, but a keystone holding up a cathedral of shadows. She was ushered into another sterile briefing room, this one colder than the last. The refrigerated chill seemed to leach the warmth from her very bones, a palpable heaviness in the air. This new location was a black site, a place without a name or a pin on a map, and she knew its purpose was twofold: her protection and her containment. She was now their most valuable and volatile asset. The room was Spartan, furnished only with metal tables and chairs that scraped harshly against the concrete floor. The only light came from the cold, flickering overhead panels and the glow of monitors. The frantic, ceaseless clatter of a keyboard was the room's heartbeat, a constant reminder of the digital war being waged around her. Files and printouts were stacked in precarious towers, a paper monument to the sprawling conspiracy they were all caught in, a Gordian knot of deceit. "Sit," the lead agent commanded without looking up from his laptop. His tone was not unkind, but it was the soft, unshakable command of a man accustomed to total obedience. Tess complied, her limbs feeling leaden as she lowered herself into the frigid metal chair. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the agent finally spoke, his eyes lifting to meet hers. "What happened in that operating room? It wasn't just about saving a life." He gestured to a large monitor behind her. She turned, her stomach tightening as footage from the ER filled the screen. she saw herself, a figure of intense focus amidst the controlled chaos. It wasn't heroism she saw. It was a terrifying, cold-blooded efficiency, her hands moving with a precision that bordered on violence as she fought to restart a dying heart. It was the ghost of the combat medic, the warrior she had tried to bury under a physician's coat. "You performed a miracle," the agent continued, his voice a low murmur. "Now we need you to perform another one." Tess remained silent. The question of how was a dead end. The answer was already branded on her, in the muscle memory of her hands and the chilling calm that settled over her in a crisis. She could no longer pretend. This was not a life she could simply walk away from. The agent's fingers danced across his keyboard. A mosaic of faces bloomed across the monitor: power brokers in boardrooms, spy masters in smoke-filled backrooms, warlords on sun-bleached tarmacs. Tess recognized none of them, yet they all felt sickeningly familiar, archetypes of the unseen forces that shape the world. Their connection to Dorian was the invisible thread tying them all together. These were the true puppeteers. A knot of acid and ice formed in her gut. This wasn't about crime. This was about absolute control. "These are the players," the agent said, his voice grim. "The ones who want to erase Dorian, and the secrets he carries, from existence." Tess leaned forward, her eyes scanning the gallery of predators. "Who are they?" she asked, the words a strained whisper. "We call them the Syndicate, for lack of a better term," he replied. "They're not an organization so much as a parasitic network. They've burrowed into every level of power. They've made themselves indispensable and invisible. Dorian was one of their chief architects, and now he's our only map to their inner sanctum." She shook her head, a tremor of disbelief running through her. "But why not just eliminate him? Why the elaborate attack?" "Because what Dorian knows isn't just data, it's leverage," the agent explained, his gaze intense. "Information that could topple governments, expose decades of covert actions, and ignite wars. Killing him cleanly might have been the plan, but you complicated that. Now his life is a strategic asset in a game no one can afford to lose." Her past was no longer a ghost. It was a physical presence in the room, its cold breath on her neck. She had run so far, for so long, only to find herself right back where she started. "What do you want from me?" Tess asked, the words hollow, resigned. "We need you to be the surgeon," the agent said, a chillingly apt metaphor. "We need you to extract what he knows, piece by piece, without killing the patient. And you must do it quietly. Our own house is compromised. There's a source, a mole, feeding them information from inside your hospital." Tess's blood ran cold. "St. Helena? That's impossible." The hospital was her sanctuary, the one place her past couldn't touch her. The agent's expression was grim. He clicked another key. A grainy, long-lens shot appeared on the screen. It was a man in surgical scrubs, his face obscured, but his posture, the furtive glance over a shoulder, the tension in his frame, screamed guilt. This man was in communication with the hit team moments before they breached the ER, the agent stated flatly, and his access credentials belonged to someone on the hospital's surgical staff. The faces of her colleagues flashed through her mind: the friendly anesthesiologist, the brilliant neurosurgeon, the nurses she shared coffee with, each now a potential mask for a killer. The betrayal was a physical blow, leaving her breathless. "We have to move," the agent's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, sharp with urgency. "They will try again. We need to find the source of the rot inside that hospital before they cut out our primary asset for good." Tess pushed herself to her feet, the decision made. Her fear hadn't vanished. It had crystallized into something cold and hard. This was no longer about survival. It was about dismantling the machine that had turned her sanctuary into a war zone. "Where do we begin?" she asked. The agent looked at her, a flicker of grim respect in his eyes. "You know the terrain, you know the people. You are our scalpel. We start by finding out which of your colleagues is a traitor." The hospital, once Tess's sanctuary, now felt like a foreign country where she no longer spoke the language. Every familiar sound, from the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum to the rhythmic sigh of a ventilator, now carried a sinister undertone. 2 days had passed since the agents had peeled back the curtain on her life, revealing the grim stagecraft beneath. 2 days of her sleeping in a featureless room and eating tasteless food, all while the specter of Dorian Sullivan and the conspiracy he embodied colonized her every waking thought. The agent's directive was simple and impossible. Go back to your life, but see it with new eyes. Keep them open. So she did. She saw the way a new janitor avoided eye contact, the way a security guard lingered a second too long near the pharmacy, the way the whole world seemed to be holding its breath. Paranoia was a fever, and hers was climbing. She stood before the heavy doors of the intensive care unit, her hand hovering over the steel plate. Inside was the source of it all. The man who was a patient, a monster, and a map, all at once. The air she drew in tasted of antiseptic and fear. Pushing the door open, she stepped into the low, controlled hum of the ward. It was a world of hushed voices and blinking lights. A place suspended between life and death. Doctors and nurses moved with a practiced, solemn choreography around the beds. But Tess's focus narrowed to a single point. The bed in the corner, surrounded by a fortress of medical technology. Dorian was a landscape of trauma. His skin, stretched taut over the hard lines of his face, was a pale, almost translucent white. Bruises bloomed like dark flowers across his chest and arms. He was utterly still, his powerful form reduced to a network of tubes and wires, his life measured out in the steady green pulse on the monitor beside him. For a moment, the conspiracy fell away. She saw only the patient, the intricate failing machine she had worked so desperately to fix. The act of saving him had been instinct. The consequences were a slow-acting poison. "Any change?" she asked, her voice low. A senior surgeon, Dr. Alpert, looked up from a chart. His face was a mask of exhaustion, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that went beyond long hours. "His vitals are holding steady," Alpert replied, his gaze drifting back to Dorian. "Which frankly is baffling. The entry wounds were precise. The shooter knew exactly where to put those bullets to cause catastrophic, non-recoverable damage. For him to be alive is an anomaly." Tess nodded, the surgeon's words confirming the cold dread in her own gut. This wasn't a botched mob hit. It was an execution that had failed. The fact that Dorian was still breathing was an affront to a very careful plan. "I'll watch him for a while," she said, needing to be near the center of the storm. Alpert gave a grateful nod and moved on. Tess stood by the bed, her eyes tracing the lines of the machines keeping Dorian alive. He was a man who had navigated a world of unimaginable violence, but she wondered if even he could survive what was coming for him now. As she turned to leave, a flicker of movement in the corridor caught her eye. It was an orderly she had never seen before, pushing a supply cart. He was tall and lean, and he moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly out of place. He didn't shuffle or hurry, he glided. His dark eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, an unnerving moment of blank, cold assessment, before he turned and disappeared into a utility closet. Every nerve in Tess's body screamed. He was wrong. She walked briskly to the main nurse's station, her heart beginning a low, heavy drum against her ribs. Feigning a need to check a patient's file, she navigated to the hospital's staff database. She typed in the parameters for new hires in the support department over the last week. The system returned 3 names. None of them matched the man she had just seen. He did not exist. He was a ghost inside the machine. Her path was clear. She moved down the corridor toward the closet the man had entered. The hospital, with its endless, identical hallways, was a maze she knew intimately. She knew the service routes, the forgotten storage rooms, the places where shadows clung like old cobwebs. This man did not belong here. The door to the closet was closed. Tess flattened herself against the cool wall beside it, her breathing shallow, listening. The sound of low, urgent voices seeped from beneath the door. One was the quiet, calculated tone of the orderly. The other was unfamiliar, sharp and edged with impatience. "We can't risk exposure," the sharp voice said. "Not with the doctor becoming a complication. She's too close." The blood in Tess's veins turned to ice. They were talking about her. Summoning a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she took a deep breath, centered herself, and pushed the door open. The closet was cramped, smelling of bleach and old paper. The two men were hunched over a tablet. One was the phantom orderly. The other was a man in a sharply tailored suit of dark wool that looked absurdly out of place. He had the hard, impassive features of a bird of prey. They both looked up as she entered. There was no surprise in the orderly's eyes, only a cold, flat recognition. The man in the suit, however, let a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "Dr. Donovan," he said, his voice like silk sliding over a blade. "I was wondering when you'd stop observing and join the conversation. You have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes, do you?" Tess stood her ground, her body thrumming with adrenaline. Her training screamed at her to identify threats, exits, improvised weapons. The room had one exit, and she was in it. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "What does Dorian have to do with this?" The orderly straightened up, his sheer size blocking the cramped space. He was a wall of muscle in a cheap uniform. "You're asking questions that will get you killed," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're being watched, Doctor," the man in the suit continued, his amusement palpable. He took a step closer, invading her space. "Every cup of coffee you drink, every call you make. We know you met with the agents. We know they think you're their secret weapon. They are wrong." His words landed like physical blows. The feeling of being watched was not paranoia. It was fact. "Your decision to save Sullivan was not a choice," the man said, his eyes boring into hers. "It was a trigger. You set a new game in motion, and the pieces are already moving. Your pieces. Our pieces. The question is, which are you?" Tess's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a game. Her colleagues, her friends, her entire life was a potential battlefield. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold command. "You are caught in the gears of a machine you cannot comprehend. You can either be crushed by it, or you can find your place within it. The agents offer you a chance to be a hero. We are offering you a chance to survive." She stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of threats and impossible choices. Her instinct was to run, to vanish, but she knew, with a soul-deep certainty, that there was nowhere left to run. "Get out of my way," Tess managed, her voice tight and shaking with fury. The man's smile returned, wider this time, utterly devoid of warmth. "A foolish choice." He gestured, and the orderly stepped aside, clearing her path. "You'll regret this." Tess backed out of the room, her eyes locked on them until she was in the corridor. She didn't turn and run. She walked, her pace measured, her mind already shifting from prey to predator. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew the web wasn't just something she was trapped in. It was something she would have to tear apart. The on-call room was a sterile box, smelling faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. Tess sat on the edge of the narrow cot, not resting, but coiled. Sleep had become a foreign concept, a luxury from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. In the 2 days since the agents had detonated her reality, her mind had defaulted to a state she recognized with a cold, hollow dread. It was the hyper-vigilance of the battlefield, a switch she thought she had permanently turned off. Now, it was burning through her, leaving her exhausted and raw. Every sound in the hospital was magnified, analyzed, and categorized as a potential threat. The gentle hum of the ventilation system was a whisper she couldn't quite make out. The distant roll of a gurney was an approaching enemy. She saw the confrontation in the utility closet on a repeating loop behind her eyes. The phantom orderly's dead gaze, the suited man's predatory smile. His words echoed in the suffocating quiet. "We are offering you a chance to survive." It was not an offer. It was a threat, wrapped in the guise of a choice. Her sanctuary had become a hunting ground. The familiar faces of her colleagues now seemed like masks, their friendly greetings potential deceptions. She found herself watching their hands, the way they held a pen or a coffee cup, looking for a tell, a sign of the violence she now knew lurked just beneath the hospital's placid surface. It was in that gray, liminal hour just before dawn, when her phone vibrated against the metal table, the sound unnaturally loud. A soft, melodic ringtone, a relic from her former life, felt like a cruel joke. She stared at the screen. The agent's blocked number, a black hole threatening to pull her in deeper. She let it go to voicemail, a small, futile act of rebellion. It rang again instantly, a shrill, insistent summons. There was no escape. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that answering it was forfeiting the last fragment of her old self. Her thumb finally slid across the screen. "Donovan," she said, the word a shard of ice. "Incident." The agent's voice was clipped, stripped of all pleasantries. "Sullivan's recovery ward. They made a move. Get down here, now." The line clicked dead. A cold fire surged through her limbs, burning away the fatigue. She was moving before the agent's last word finished echoing in her ear. Her sneakers made no sound on the tiled floor as she strode down the hallway, her posture straight, her senses acute. Every instinct she had painstakingly buried for years was now fully awake, a feral creature pacing the cage of her mind. The journey to the intensive care unit was a descent through layers of escalating tension. The hospital's morning rhythm was broken, dissonant. She saw a nurse at a distant station drop a metal tray. The clatter made 3 people flinch violently. Near the elevators, 2 orderlies spoke in frantic, hushed tones, their eyes wide and darting. The very air felt thin and charged, humming with an unspoken panic. The whole building seemed to be holding its breath, bracing for an impact it knew was coming. She pushed through the heavy double doors of the ICU, and the scene that exploded before her was a vortex of controlled pandemonium. It was a maelstrom of desperate motion and piercing sound. A tight, frantic cluster of doctors and nurses swarmed a bed in the corner, their scrubs a frantic mosaic of blue and green. Alarms shrieked from multiple machines, a discordant symphony of crisis. The metallic, coppery smell of blood was thick in the air, so potent it was almost a taste. And in the center of it all, on sheets stained a brilliant, horrifying crimson, was a man whose powerful frame was contorted in agony. It was Dorian. For 1/2 second, the world fractured. It was a single, silent moment of cold fury before the soldier in her mind slammed a door on all emotion. The doctor took over, but a different kind of doctor than the one who had clocked in for a shift. This was the medic, the trauma surgeon of last resort. "Clear this area. We need to get him to the OR." Dr. Alpert, the senior surgeon, was shouting, his face a furious mask of sweat and stress. He saw Tess at the edge of the chaos, and his frustration boiled over. "Donovan, get out! This is my patient!" "Let her through," a voice cut through the noise with chilling authority. The lead agent materialized from the shadows near the wall, his face a carving of grim resolve. Tess pushed past a protesting nurse, ignoring Alpert's incensed glare. She reached the bedside, her gaze sweeping over Dorian in a rapid, clinical assessment. He was drowning. His skin had a cyanotic gray tinge, and his breathing was a shallow, desperate rattle in his chest. His vitals, displayed in frantic, jagged lines on the monitor, were in a death spiral. The first attack had been a clean, methodical attempt. This was brutal, overwhelming, and personal. The agent leaned in close, his voice a low growl meant only for her, the scent of ozone and danger clinging to him. They got to him. A single assailant, dressed as an orderly, neutralized by my team, but not before he did this. We need him stable enough to move, or he dies here. She did not answer. Her gloved fingers found the thready, desperate pulse in Dorian's neck. It was a butterfly's wing, faint and erratic, beating against the encroaching void. In that vortex of chaos, a profound, crystalline calm descended over Tess. The shouts, the alarms, the agent's tense presence, all of it receded into a distant, irrelevant hum. Her world narrowed to the patient, the data, the cascade of symptoms. This was her element, the bloody, desperate place where healing was a form of warfare. Her eyes flickered from his new wounds, a series of vicious stabs to the abdomen, to the IV lines snaking into his arms, then to the monitor. The decline was too fast, too catastrophic. It wasn't just blood loss. The specific arrhythmia, the pinpoint pupils, the subtle, terrifying fasciculations twitching just under the surface of his skin. It was a pattern, a toxicological fingerprint. A memory, sharp and unwanted, flashed in her mind. A stiflingly hot field tent in a country that did not officially exist. A captured operative who had bit down on a cyanide capsule. The same pinpoint pupils. The same desperate gasping for air in a room full of oxygen. She leaned closer to the IV port in his arm, ignoring the frantic work of the other doctors. There it was, faint, almost imperceptible beneath the smell of blood and antiseptic. The bitter, almond-like scent of poison. "He's been poisoned," Tess snapped, her voice cutting through the din with the sharp crack of a rifle shot. She moved with a brutal, startling efficiency. "Someone switched his drip." "What are you talking about? He's bleeding out," Alpert countered, enraged. "He's dying of cyanide poisoning," she retorted, not looking at him. Her hands were already working, yanking the IV spike from the bag. The fluid inside looked like simple saline, a perfect, deadly deception. "The wounds are a diversion." A nurse, a young man with panicked eyes, grabbed her arm. "You can't do that without an order." Tess rounded on him, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made him recoil. "Then consider it an order." Her voice was not loud, but it held an absolute, unbreakable authority that silenced the room. She ripped the contaminated line from his arm. With the practiced speed of someone who had done this under fire, she grabbed a fresh bag of saline, spiked it, and primed a new line. From a nearby crash cart, she pulled a syringe and 2 large vials. Hydroxycobalamin. The antidote. It was a last resort, a Hail Mary. "Dorian, you son of a bitch, you will not die on me," she whispered, the words of fierce, desperate command as she injected the thick, dark red fluid directly into the new IV port. Not like this. For an agonizing, eternal 10 seconds, nothing happened. The frantic downward spiral on the monitor continued. The alarm still shrieked. The room held its breath. Alpert and the other staff stared at her, their faces a mixture of shock, outrage, and dawning horror. They were watching a surgeon go completely rogue, staking a man's life on a wild, unsubstantiated claim. Then, a change. It was not on the monitor at first. It was in the man himself. A subtle relaxation in the knotted muscles of his jaw. A slight, almost imperceptible deepening of his next ragged breath. The violent, tiny twitches under his skin began to subside. On the screen, the jagged, desperate rhythm of his heart hitched, faltered, and then caught. A single, strong beat, then another. The chaotic alarm softened into a steadier, more regular pulse. It was still weak, still dangerously unstable, but it was the rhythm of life, not of death. Tess allowed herself a single, shaky exhale, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its wake. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. When she finally looked up, the entire medical team was staring at her as if she were an apparition. Albert's mouth was slightly agape, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. She met the agent's eyes across the bed. His face was unreadable, but for a split second she saw it again, that brief, unguarded look of something that bordered on awe. "They didn't just use a blade this time," he said, his voice a low, hard growl. "They used a syringe. That means the mole isn't just an informant. They have hands-on, patient-level access." The implication struck Tess with the force of a physical blow. She tore her gaze away from Dorian and looked at the faces in the room. The doctors, the nurses, her colleagues. One of them might have hung that bag. One of them might have smiled at her this morning before coming to commit murder. The walls of her world had not just crumbled, they had been revealed as a painted backdrop, and behind them was a pit. "We move him," she said, her voice quiet but as unyielding as forged steel. "We move him now. He will not survive another night in this hospital." The agent nodded, his expression grim. "I have a transport team on standby. But you need to understand, Tess. By doing this, by saving him again, you have ceased to be a complication. You have become the primary target." Tess looked down at her hands, still steady, stained with a mixture of Dorian's blood and the red antidote. She was no longer a doctor caught in a conspiracy. She was a combatant. "Then let them come," she said. Fear was a cold, clinical thing. Tess had once thought of it as a hot, panicked rush, but as the hours bled into one another in the cavernous warehouse, she found it was a different beast entirely. It was a slow-acting cryogen seeping into her marrow, sharpening her senses to an unbearable, razor-fine edge. The hospital, her former sanctuary, now felt like a photograph of a life she used to have. This new reality was concrete and iron, smelling of oil, damp earth, and the metallic tang of impending violence. They had moved Dorian to this undisclosed location, a sprawling industrial shell on the city's forgotten fringe. High, steel-beamed ceilings were lost in the gloom above, and the vast open floor was a maze of stacked shipping containers and silent, shrouded machinery. Every sound, from the drip of water in a far corner to the scuff of an agent's boot, echoed with unnerving clarity. This was not a place of healing. It was a fortress, and Tess knew, with a certainty that made the hairs on her arms stand up, that all fortresses are eventually besieged. "Stay sharp," the lead agent murmured, his voice a low rumble that was immediately swallowed by the immense space. He stood beside her, his gaze sweeping the catwalks above them. "Perimeter is set, but they're professionals. They'll test it." Tess gave a curt nod, her own eyes tracing the deep pools of shadow between the hulking shapes. She was no stranger to pressure, but this was a suffocating, atmospheric weight. The conspiracy was no longer an abstract concept, it was an active hunter, and its eyes were fixed on this very spot. In the center of the warehouse floor, a clean zone had been established. A collection of portable medical equipment formed a makeshift intensive care unit under the harsh, white glare of temporary floodlights. Dorian lay on a reinforced cot, a still point in the tense, expectant quiet. His chest rose and fell in a shallow, machine-assisted rhythm. The agents had saved him, Tess had saved him, but he was a king on a chessboard, temporarily out of play but still the target of the entire game. The moment he regained consciousness, his value and his danger would skyrocket. Tess moved to his side, her movements economical and precise. She checked his vitals on the portable monitor, her fingers brushing his wrist to feel the faint, thready pulse for herself. He was stable, but it was the stability of a house of cards. The slightest tremor could bring it all down. As she adjusted his IV line, she saw it. A flicker, a minute, almost imperceptible twitch of his eyelid. He was close. The thought sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through her. Her thoughts were shattered by a sharp crackle of static from the agent's earpiece. followed by a frantic, distorted voice. "Sir, we have a breach. Sector 4. They're not testing the perimeter, they're through it." Simultaneously, the world plunged into absolute blackness. The main power was cut. A second later, emergency lights flickered on, powered by a backup generator. They were low, casting long, distorted shadows that turned the familiar shapes of machinery into monstrous silhouettes. The warehouse was no longer a fortress, it was a tomb. The lead agent grabbed his weapon, his face a grim mask in the eerie red light. "They're here," he snarled. "We've got intel," another agent shouted from a bank of portable comms equipment, his face illuminated by the green glow of his screen. "The mole! We've identified the source." Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who?" The agent's eyes lifted from the screen, wide with dawning horror. "It's Dr. Neil Parker. He's been feeding the syndicate tactical data for years, and God help us, he's not at the hospital. He's leading the assault team. He just walked them through our defenses." The name struck Tess like a physical blow. Dr. Parker, the affable, silver-haired head of trauma surgery, the man who had mentored her, who had praised her work, who had shaken her hand and told her she had a gift. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it left her breathless. Before she could process it, the air itself seemed to tear apart. The sharp, deafening report of automatic gunfire erupted from the catwalks above. Bullets sparked off the concrete floor and ricocheted off steel beams with high-pitched metallic screams. The agents returned fire, the muzzle flashes creating a terrifying, strobing effect in the dim light. The battle had begun. Tess reacted without thinking. She threw her body over Dorian, shielding his still form as concrete chips rained down around them. The soldier in her had taken complete control, her mind a cold, clear calculator of threats and priorities. Protect the asset. An operative in dark tactical gear descended from a rope and landed silently not 10 feet from her. He raised his weapon, the red dot of a laser sight dancing across the medical equipment. One of the agents shouted her name and fired, but the operative was already turning. Tess grabbed the heaviest object she could reach, a solid steel oxygen tank. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she swung it like a club, connecting with the man's knee. The sickening crunch of bone was followed by his agonized cry as he crumpled to the floor. She didn't hesitate, bringing the tank down again on his head with brutal, final efficiency. She looked down at her hands, then at the fallen man, a cold detachment washing over her. There was no time for shock. She had to move Dorian, but he was a dead weight. "Dorian!" she hissed, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up!" There was no response. She needed him conscious. She needed him to move. A desperate, incredibly risky idea formed in her mind. From her medical kit, she pulled a syringe and a vial of epinephrine. A full dose would send him into cardiac arrest, but a microdose, delivered directly into the main line, might be enough to jolt his system out of its stupor without killing him. It was a wild gamble, a move no sane doctor would ever make. "Forgive me for this," she muttered, her hands steady as she injected a tiny, precise amount into his IV port. "Wake up, you son of a bitch, or we both die here." For a few seconds, nothing. Then, a violent shudder ran through Dorian's body. His back arched, and his eyes flew open, wide and disoriented, but shockingly alert. He gasped, a raw, ragged sound, his gaze locking onto hers. "What?" he rasped, his voice a gravelly ruin. "No time," she said, already cutting the restraints holding him to the cot. "They're here to finish the job. Can you walk?" He stared at her, then at the firefight raging around them. A flicker of his old, formidable self returned to his eyes. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself up, swaying dangerously. "Get me a weapon." The firefight was dying down, the sharp reports replaced by single sporadic shots. The agents were efficient, but the sudden relative quiet was more terrifying than the noise. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a man in a dark jacket holding a sidearm. His silver hair was perfectly in place. It was Dr. Parker. He looked at the scene, at the downed operatives, with an expression of cold disappointment. Then his eyes settled on Tess and the now conscious Dorian. "Remarkable, Doctor," Parker said, his voice the same calm, paternal tone he used in the operating room. It was grotesque. "Even now, you continue to exceed expectations. I always said you had a gift." "You," Tess breathed, her voice trembling with a cold, white-hot rage. "You did this. You tried to kill him. You betrayed every oath we ever took." "Oaths?" Parker scoffed, taking a slow step forward. "Oaths are for children. They are comforting lies we tell ourselves to ignore the fundamental truth of the world. There is no order but the one we impose. I chose the side that is strong enough to impose it. The syndicate brings order. You, and men like him," he gestured to Dorian, "represent chaos." Dorian, leaning heavily against a crate, let out a harsh laugh. "You call serving faceless masters order, Neil? I call it a leash." Parker's calm facade finally cracked. His face twisted into a sneer. "You were a tool, Dorian, a valuable one. But you grew sentimental. You became a liability. And now, you both are." He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at Tess's head. "The world doesn't need saviors, Doctor. It needs surgeons willing to cut out the infection." Time seemed to slow. This was the end of the equation. Parker's finger tightened on the trigger. In that split second, Dorian lunged. It wasn't an attack. It was a desperate, stumbling shove against a stack of empty metal barrels. They crashed to the ground with a deafening, echoing clang. Parker flinched, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. It was all Tess needed. She launched herself forward, not at the gun, but at his arm. She drove the heel of her hand up under his elbow, forcing it to hyperextend. He screamed in pain as the arm bent the wrong way, the pistol clattering to the concrete floor. She didn't stop. She brought her knee up hard into his midsection, and as he doubled over, gasping, she finished it with a sharp, brutal blow to the side of his neck. He crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence. The warehouse was utterly still, the air thick with the smell of cordite and ozone. Tess stood over Parker's unconscious form, her chest heaving, her entire body shaking with the adrenaline crash. The lead agent appeared at her side, his own weapon still drawn. He looked at Parker, then at Tess, then at the weakly grinning Dorian. A slow, genuine look of respect dawned on his face. "You did good, Doctor," he said. Tess looked down at her hands. They were shaking now, but they had been steady when it mattered. She was a healer, but tonight she had been a warrior. Maybe she had always been both. Dorian pushed himself away from the crate, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on her. He was weak, wounded, but the man within was very much alive. "You," he rasped, his voice quiet but clear. "You have a fire in your veins." The agent stepped forward. "This battle is over. But the war has just begun. They know we have him, and they know who you are now. There's no going back to your old life." He holstered his weapon. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Tess looked at the chaos around her, at the man she had saved 3 times over, at the traitor who had once been her mentor. Her old life was gone. It had vanished in a flash of gunfire and betrayal, but in its place, something new and hard and resilient had been forged. She was no longer a victim caught in a web. She was a player in the game. She met the agent's gaze, her own clear and unwavering. She gave a single determined nod. The quiet of the transport vehicle was a suffocating, soundless scream. Every rumble of the engine, every shift of the agent's weight felt like a tremor preceding an earthquake. Tess sat staring at the reinforced glass, but she saw nothing of the city's blurred lights. Instead, she saw the ghost of Dr. Parker's paternal smile, now twisted into a grotesque mask of betrayal. The knowledge that a man she had respected, a mentor, was the architect of so much death, had carved something hollow inside her. It was a cold, clean wound that would not bleed. Their destination was not a warehouse. It was something older, deeper. The SUV descended a long, steep ramp into the earth, the air growing colder and heavier with the scent of damp concrete and decay. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space, an abandoned subway maintenance depot. Ghostly, decommissioned train cars rested on silent tracks, shrouded in thick canvas tarps. A labyrinth of catwalks and iron stairways crisscrossed the gloom overhead. It was a city beneath the city, a place forgotten by the sun, a perfect place to hide or a perfect place to be buried. The agents moved with practiced, silent efficiency, establishing a perimeter. In the center of the depot, beneath the skeletal framework of an old gantry crane, they created a sterile field. The portable medical equipment from the warehouse was set up, its modern, sterile presence a stark intrusion in the industrial tomb. Dorian was transferred to a cot, his stillness a stark contrast to the coiled tension of the dozen agents now securing the depot. Tess stood by his side, her purpose narrowed to this single fragile life. The agent's words echoed in her mind. The mole wasn't just an informant. They had hands-on, patient-level access. It was the nurse who poisoned the IV. The thought was a fresh twist of the knife. Parker was the mastermind. But the hands that had nearly delivered the fatal dose belonged to someone she likely shared coffee with, someone whose name she probably knew. The rot was deeper than she could have imagined. "We have a name," the lead agent said, appearing at her side like a specter. His voice was low, but it cut through the cavernous quiet. The nurse who switched the IV bag, Jenna Mays, a junior surgical nurse, on our payroll as a low-level informant, on theirs as a saboteur. She fed Parker the final intel on our extraction plan. She gave him this location. Jenna, a young woman with a bright, eager smile and a reputation for being meticulous. Tess felt a wave of nausea. She had shown Jenna how to prime an IV line just last month. "Where is she now?" Tess asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "In the wind," the agent replied grimly. "But her betrayal has already happened. They're coming, Doctor. Parker won't let this go. He's not a mobster. He's a zealot. He believes in his cause." Just as he spoke, a soft, almost gentle pop echoed from the far end of the depot, followed by the sound of shattering glass. A second later, the powerful floodlights illuminating their medical station died. The entire depot plunged into an abyss of absolute blackness. It was a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against her eardrums. Then, the emergency protocol kicked in. Low, blood-red emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced and writhed. The train cars became slumbering beasts. The catwalks became skeletal webs. The depot transformed from a hiding place into a hunting ground. The agent was already moving, his weapon raised, his voice a sharp command into his radio. "All teams, code black. Hostiles are inside the wire. Repeat, hostiles are inside." The response was not radio static. It was the sharp, terrifying crack of a high-caliber rifle from the darkness above. A bullet sparked off the concrete floor inches from Tess's feet. A sniper. Tess reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed the edge of the heavy canvas tarp covering the nearest train car and yanked. With a groan of rusted metal rings, it slid free, and she shoved Dorian's cot into the deep shadow beneath the train's undercarriage. It was meager cover, but it was out of the direct line of sight. The battle erupted. Muzzle flashes strobed from the catwalks, a terrifying Morse code of death. The agents on the ground took cover behind thick concrete pillars and ancient machinery, returning fire. The enclosed space amplified the sound of the firefight into a deafening, percussive roar. Bullets ricocheted with vicious, whining shrieks. Tess lay flat on the grimy floor, her heart hammering. This was it. The final bloody confrontation. She was a doctor, a healer. She had no weapon, no body armor. But the medic in her, the soldier who had survived far worse, was wide awake. She scanned her surroundings, not for an escape route, but for a tactical advantage. An agent near her cried out and fell, clutching his leg. From the shadows, a figure in full tactical gear emerged, moving with a silent, predatory grace. Tess saw the insignia on his shoulder, a stylized black serpent. The syndicate's elite, the cleaner. He raised his weapon to finish the wounded agent. Tess didn't think. She snatched a heavy, iron wrench from a discarded tool belt on the floor. It was heavy, poorly balanced, but it was solid. She scrambled from under the train and charged, a silent, desperate shadow. He heard her at the last second and started to turn. She swung the wrench with all her strength, not at his armored torso, but at the side of his knee. The impact was sickeningly solid. The man screamed, a raw, animal sound of pain as his leg buckled. As he fell, she brought the wrench down again on his exposed neck. He went limp. She stood over him, her chest heaving, the wrench dripping. A cold clarity washed over her. She was not helpless. Another attacker appeared on the gantry crane above, methodically picking off the agents below. Tess looked around frantically. She saw a junction box on a nearby pillar, thick electrical cables running from it. One of them was labeled Gantry Crane Primary. An idea, insane and desperate, took hold. "Cover me!" she screamed at the nearest agent. He looked at her, his eyes wide with confusion, but then nodded, laying down a burst of suppressive fire toward the crane. Tess sprinted across the open ground, the air alive with the snap of passing bullets. She reached the pillar and tore open the junction box. Inside was a tangle of wires. It was a gamble. Using the insulated handle of the wrench, she pried at the main conduit. With a final, desperate heave, she broke the connection and slammed the live, frayed cable against the pillar's steel support beam. An explosion of blue and white sparks erupted with a deafening roar. The entire gantry crane shuddered as the power surged and then died. The sniper's perch went dark. A satisfying, heavy thud echoed from above a moment later. The firefight began to subside. The agents were gaining the upper hand. The initial, overwhelming assault had been blunted, but the silence that followed was heavy with dread. A slow, deliberate clapping sound echoed from the main tunnel entrance. Dr. Parker stepped into the dim, red light. He was not alone. Behind him stood two more of the black-clad soldiers, their weapons trained on the remaining agents. Parker held a small, sophisticated remote detonator in his hand. "Brilliant, Doctor," he said, his voice calm, amplified by the acoustics of the depot. "Truly inspired. You see, this is what I have always admired about you, your capacity for improvisation. It's a shame it must end here." "It's over, Parker," the lead agent growled, his own weapon aimed at the doctor's chest. "Is it?" Parker asked, a thin, cruel smile on his face. "You've handled my assault team admirably. But you've forgotten something. This depot was slated for demolition. It is still wired with enough explosives to bring the entire city block down on top of us. I, of course, have a clear path to an exit. You do not." He held up the detonator. "Checkmate." Tess's blood ran cold. He would kill everyone, including his own remaining men, just to win. He was a true fanatic. It was then that a new voice, low and raspy, spoke from the darkness under the train. "You always did favor the grand gesture, Neil." Dorian Sullivan pulled himself from under the train. He was pale, leaning heavily on the steel frame, but his eyes burned with a cold, clear fire. He was awake. Parker's smile faltered for a second. "Dorian, you are a cockroach. It seems I must kill you a third time." "You talk of order," Dorian said, his voice gaining strength. "But you are a slave to a script. You think because you have the detonator, you hold all the cards. But you made a mistake. You came here yourself." Arrogance, perhaps, Parker admitted, but it is a privilege I have earned. No, Dorian said, pushing himself upright. It is a flaw, because you are the asset. Without you, the command codes to your network are useless. Your masters cannot afford to lose you. He took a painful step forward. They will sacrifice their pawns, their knights, even their queen. But not the man who holds the keys. You are more valuable alive than all of us are dead. Parker hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had built his world on control, on knowing every variable. Dorian had just introduced one he hadn't considered, his own value. In that moment of hesitation, Tess moved. She didn't run at him. She ran sideways toward a large red lever on the wall marked Emergency Track Purge. She had no idea what it did, but its placement and its color screamed it was important. She slammed her full weight onto it. With a deep, grinding groan, a section of the floor gave way. The maintenance pit directly in front of Parker fell open, a 10-foot drop into darkness. One of Parker's guards, caught by surprise, tumbled in with a shout. The other guard turned his weapon on Tess, but Dorian, with a sudden, surprising burst of speed, threw a discarded piece of pipe like a spear. It struck the guard's weapon, knocking it aside. The lead agent did not miss his opportunity. A single precise shot from his sidearm struck Parker's hand. The detonator flew through the air, tumbling end over end before clattering harmlessly to the ground. Parker screamed, clutching his shattered hand. It was over. The remaining agents swiftly subdued Parker and his last soldier. Silence, true and final, descended upon the depot. Tess stood, her chest heaving, her body trembling with the adrenaline crash. She looked at Dorian, who was now leaning against a pillar, a grim smile on his face. He met her gaze. "Fire in the veins," he murmured, then nodded his head toward her. A gesture of respect, acknowledgement. The lead agent approached them, his face exhausted but victorious. "We have Parker. We have the detonator. We have won the battle." He looked from Dorian to Tess. "But the war has just begun. The syndicate will not stop. They will write Parker off and send another, and another. They will never stop hunting you, Dorian. And they will never stop trying to eliminate you, Doctor." He paused, his gaze intense. "My agency has been fighting this shadow war for a decade, and we have been losing. We are a blunt instrument. What we need is a scalpel and a map." He looked at Dorian. "You are the map. You know their networks, their safe houses, their leaders." Then he looked at Tess. "And you, Doctor, are the scalpel. You are precise, unpredictable, and you can get into places we never could. You are the piece they can never account for." He made a formal offer, not to an asset, but to a partner. "Help us. We will form a new unit. Off the books. A ghost unit dedicated to one purpose, dismantling the syndicate piece by piece. You will have our resources. Our protection. In return, we get a fighting chance." Tess looked at the carnage around her, at the man she had saved, at the traitor who had once been her friend. Her old life was ash. Running was no longer an option. She had been forged into something new in this fire. She was no longer running from her past. She would weaponize it. She looked at Dorian, then back at the agent. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, echoing in the vast, silent depot. It was the voice of a woman who had finally found her true purpose. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.